traders, how are you? With Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets this week, and I have a list this big of conspiracy theories. Let's go and get started. A lot of things going on with this total eclipse on April 8th. Federal warnings about flying. States are blocking, the semis and cargo traffic. Super weird. But we'll get into it here in a second. S&P 500 in the U.S., one of the main indexes in the United States, stock indexes hit a record high. The Dow and the S&P 500 both were positive, but the NASDAQ, which is primarily the technology stocks, let's say, overall summary, not all of them, but that went down 0.30%. The exchange in the Communist Republic of Canada went up 0.74%. And now we're going to get into the good stuff, the conspiracy news. So, really, really weird, the things that are coming out about this eclipse. And I would probably warn you not to go out that day or travel, just kind of chill, maybe take a sick day. First of all, the state of Texas is not allowing any size or weight travel, meaning no cargo traffic on the day of the eclipse. And on top of that, the FAA, which is the government body in the United States that kind of regulates air traffic, they're warning that on April 8th, there's going to be anticipated increased traffic, and they're also warning pilots that there may be some changes in the processes and rules and things like that. I thought that was really, really weird. On top of that, if you're a religious person, the eclipse, the path actually follows 7 cities named Nineveh. If you don't know what Nineveh is, or if you haven't read the Bible, it's basically a city from antiquity that's mentioned a lot in the Bible. And on top of that, NASA is sending up 3 rockets, supposedly to the backside of the moon to, quote-unquote, check the temperature. 1 rocket isn't enough. They're going to send 3 rockets to check the temperature. Another thing that was really weird is CERN, which is the collider that's in Switzerland. If you guys don't know what that is, basically it's a huge circle-looking thing that smashes atoms together, and what they look for is the God particle. Some conspiracy theorists are saying that they're opening portals to other worlds and talking to the devil and stuff, but they're also going to activate the collider. I don't want to get into the specifics on April 8th as well. I think this is super weird, right? On top of the fact that the government is warning about the travel, the state of Texas is not allowing cargo traffic. Be careful, y'all. The largest fertilizer plant in the United States was almost completely in flames in Florida just a few hours after the Baltimore Bridge collapse. So while everybody was paying attention to the accident in the Baltimore Bridge, one of the main fertilizer, the fertilizer we need to grow food in the world, was almost up in flames. Thought that was also very peculiar. In California, they approved the largest a-hole in the world, Bill Gates' plan to make residents drink their own feces. They're going to take the sewage water, process it, and since the government does everything so well, I'm sure it'll be safe and effective. Just 2 weeks to stop the curve. And Navy Marine Corps are finding heart disease is up in Navy pilots 973% between 2002 2003. What do you guys think about those jabby jabs now? State Farm is canceling 72,000 property insurance policies in California. If you guys have watched me for a while, I told you I think there's going to be probably a big earthquake in California, I'd say within a year to 3 years or so. So I think they're kind of preparing for that. And they're actually, supposedly what I read is they can actually predict or know a lot of times when earthquakes was going to happen. I don't know if you guys remember the huge earthquake that hit Turkey recently, but the United States got the ambassadors out of the embassies, and they got the people out of the embassies before the earthquake hit. Now, that's super weird, but to me, it tells me that they knew that they were going to, they knew it was going to happen. And interesting news on the U.S. dollar, the purchasing power, meaning what you're able to buy with the U.S. dollar, has gone down 25% since 2020. Doing the math on about 3.2 years or so, it's about 8% a year. So they're telling us that the inflation rate is 3, 4, 5%, but in reality, every dollar now that you go to spend something on, you're only able to buy 75 cents worth of goods or services. Like the Five Guys story. Want me to tell you guys the Five Guys story? All you guys complaining about that Five Guys story. Overseas market news, the European markets were mostly higher. Russia was the biggest winner there. And Latin America, mostly higher as well. The exchange in the Bovespa, which is the biggest market in all of Latin America, went up 0.84%. Africa and the Middle East is mixed. Egypt being the biggest loser there. And then in the far, far east, Australia, Asia, most of those markets were below 1%, but that whole region was mostly mixed as well. Bitcoin and crypto news. Sam Bankman-Fried, the ostracized ex-founder and ex-CEO of FTX, which was at one point the second largest crypto exchange in the world, was sentenced to 25 years in prison. They found that he illegally used depositors' funds to bankroll his lavish lifestyle, even though he doesn't look very lavish, if you guys have ever seen a picture of him. He bought private planes, made political donations, and purchased luxury properties with the money of clients. And Coinbase, which is the largest crypto exchange in the United States, went down 4% after a judge agreed to allow the government to sue Coinbase on the fact that they're engaging in unregistered sale of securities. They're also considering classifying the Ether token as a security as well, second largest blockchain security after Bitcoin, essentially. And that could have very big ramifications with the crypto market as a whole. Bitcoin for the week is up 9.91%, just under 70,000. Remember that it did hit a record high recently. In commodities, crude was up over 3% to 83.17, while Brent was up about 1.55% to $87. The biggest news in the commodity space was the cacao, if I can say it right, the cacao futures. Now, the price of cacao on a ton, or price per ton, is more expensive than copper, if you can actually believe it. So, buy the chocolate now that you need, because soon you might not be able to find it, or it's going to be too expensive. Basically, what's happening is 70% of the cacao that's produced in the world, which is used for chocolate, is produced out of 3 countries in Western Africa. Due to El Nino, there's been a lot of floods, and a lot of floods creates a lot of the... a plaga, you say in Spanish, an insect that basically eats the plant, causes the production to go down. The cacao has risen 129% so far this year, 3 times over the last year. And just to give you an example, for my friends in the United States, I know in Europe you don't have this horrible candy bar called Hershey's, but in a Hershey's candy bar, which is about, I want to say about that size or so, right? I'm looking at the camera here. About that size or so, about that size. Has 11% of cacao. This is the biggest cacao deficit in 60 years. So go and stock up, especially on that Swiss chocolate, because that stuff is amazing. Gold hit a record high, went up 3.16% for the week. It's turning out to be its best month in 4 years. It's at $2,234, while silver went up 1.25% to $25.04. And in financial and banking news, the yen, which is the Japanese currency, had hit its weakest level against the dollar in 34 years, about 1990. Raise your hand if you're a kid from the 90s. It seems like it was yesterday. In 1990 from now seems a long time ago. Pending home sales also on current, not new homes being built, but the homes that are already built, are hovering near record lows in February. And in political news, a New York appeals court on Monday suspended the judgment against President Trump that he had to pay $464 million. He now has to pay, or wants to agree to pay, a $175 million bond within 10 days to avoid the bigger payment. And he also went public with one of his companies, so he's now worth about $6.5 billion, which is one of the richest 500 people in the world. In economic news, the U.S. Commerce Department said that the third and final estimate for the quarter 4 GDP grew more than expected at 3.4%. And the UK, which is still one of the largest economies in the world, actually fell into a recession the second half of the year, which most of Europe, and Europe as a whole is the third largest economy in the world, by the way. Most of Europe is probably going to head into a recession as well. U.S. initial claims of unemployment fell by 2,000 seats, or 2,000 people, essentially. Remember that if less people are asking for unemployment, that would imply that the economy is doing well. That's essentially why the Fed decided not to raise rates last week, and they're still, quote-unquote, on track to drop those rates by the end of the year. The consumer sentiment in March exploded to 79.4, reaching its best level since July 2021. Optimism on the economic outlook, and remember that the consumer spending is the single most important number in the economy in the United States because it's almost 70% of the economy. And most industrialized economies, for example, Germany is 50% consumer spending. That's the biggest number by far. And since the United States is still the biggest economy in the world, obviously it's definitely a number we have to pay attention to. In corporate news, McDonald's is planning on spending on selling Krispy Kreme donuts in all of its restaurants by 2025. Both announced on Tuesday, so they can both keep selling cancer and venom to everybody. And Morgan Stanley cut forecasts of Tesla vehicle deliveries due to a drop in demand, a lot of competition also against the Chinese suppliers. Xiaomi, which is a battery and cell phone supplier in China, is now going to start selling a car that's cheaper than Tesla. And the CEO said that they beat Tesla in all of the specifications except for two, which they think that they'll be able to catch up in a few years. But essentially, Tesla may be in a little bit of trouble because now the competition is catching up. And due to that, Tesla's down 29% so far this quarter, the absolute worst quarter performance for the company, down almost 10% year over year, while the S&P 500 is up over 32%. And Reddit, which is the forum company, that went up 9% on Tuesday. Investors continue to buy it after the IPO, but it took a pretty big hit on Wednesday and Thursday after it was known that the CEO and the COO sold hundreds of thousands, millions of shares. The stock has gone up 92% since debuting on the NYSE in March 25. Elon Musk in technology is releasing his next version of his XAI chatbot, the artificial intelligence. He says they're going to be able to he's going to be able to test it on X for Twitter. And soon he's going to be able to have even more news, especially about the Neuralink as well. Investment news, Mumbai, the city in India, essentially the New York of India, is now the city with the most billionaires, overtaking Beijing. Kind of a sign of the times, in my opinion, because India is booming while China isn't doing so well. They're topping the richest, where the most of the billionaires live. You have Mumbai, number one in India, Beijing, number two, and then New York, London. I wouldn't live in New York or London if I were you, but, if you got billions of dollars, I guess you're going to have security and everything. But international events, the Port of Baltimore obviously got taken down by the ship, which supposedly lost its electricity. One of the things that most people don't know about the port is that it's the 17th among U.S. ports with tonnage handled, while 15th in containers handled. So it's a pretty big port. And that's going to cause probably a lot of supply constraints, kind of similar to what happened during COVID. And it's also a situation where it affects the rapid response of the military in the United States. I don't think it was an accident, but, the government's always right. They've never hid anything from us. And interesting facts, the construction site in Pompeii has been discovered. If you guys don't know what Pompeii is, it's a city in Italy where Mount Vesuvius, a volcano, basically just buried the entire town in lava and ash. And they've been able to kind of see the way that people live because everybody got buried almost instantly. And they actually found a construction site where they were initiating construction, so they're able to see the materials they use, how they were building. It's pretty interesting. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, the preppers were right.